young is to be in a stage of becoming, of working towards your goals and aspirations to transition from being dependent to independent. However, the youth of this country are perpetual children, and some will never know independence until their old age. At the realization of how doomed we are under your leadership, Mr. President, thousands continue to give in to nyaupe, and young women and girls amount to bottle girls for you and your friends at the peak of their vibrancy and zeal for life and prosperity. We live with our parents, and finding a 40-year-old man asking his mother for bread is more common than otherwise. This phenomenon is known as the Ramaphosa economy. Joblessness, poverty, and constantly questioning if we are truly the young adults of today.
Yes, indeed. This is ANC economy. This is Ramaphosa economy. If you use logic. In other words, we put feelings aside and use logic. From 1994 until 2024, you can tell that based on history, ANC doesn't have that history of eliminating poverty or a history of creating job opportunities like nobody's business. So they have a problem. In other words, their policies cannot create new opportunities. Their policies cannot eliminate poverty. This is their history. So this is the economy of Ramaphosa. This is the economy of ANC, especially if you look at history. This is truth, because if you check the numbers, then you'll realize that indeed ANC doesn't have a history of creating jobs, because since 1994 until 2024, the unemployment rate has been increasing. So this is the sober truth.
In 2018, Mr. President, you launched a job summit and promised the youth of this country 275,000 jobs per year. You failed. In 2019, you promised 2 million jobs and an end to hunger, halving of crime, and empowering the school curriculum where a 10-year-old will be able to read for comprehension. You failed. In 2020, you unveiled a 100 billion rand fund to create jobs in the public sector for the youth. You failed. You launched the NSP against GBV and femicide, and 4 years later, on the eve of elections 2024, the murderer of Kidisaletse Elsin Donje was granted bail of 2,000 rands. You failed. In 2021, you spoke about building new cities, and the National Youth Development Agency would fund 1,000 young entrepreneurs in 100 days. You failed. In 2022, plagued by your own failures over the years, you promised the National Youth Service would create a modest 50,000 jobs in its first phase. You failed. In 2023, you came here and praised yourself for the Youth Employment Service that placed 100,000 youth in peace jobs that lasted nothing more than 12 months. Once again, you failed. Yesterday, you came to this house and promised 2 million jobs to the youth of South Africa. It is thus fair and deliberate to then say that this time next year, the result will once again be not achieved and failed. When you became president in 2018, youth unemployment was sitting at 43%. And nearly 7 years into your presidency, youth unemployment currently sits at 45% for individuals aged 15 to 34, and a whopping 59% for young people aged 15 to 24. Your presidency is characterized by many and many promises and many failures. It is now apparent that as the youth of today, we must ready ourselves psychologically like the youth of 1976 for the biggest fight against the establishment. The establishment has charged you, Mr. President, at the forefront as the weapon that is formed against us. The youth of today, like Nelson Mandela, who is now hailed as an icon of peace, must be ready to be called terrorists. We must be ready to be called criminals. We must be ready to be jailed for crimes we did not commit. We must be ready to be character assassinated like Ida Mtwana, Robert Sobukwe, Uncle Potitiro, Steve Biko, Winnie Mandela, and Julius Malema.
No one can dispute these failures of ANC, not even the political parties that are within GNU, because all these political parties, or most of these political parties, have been campaigning using the very same failures of African National Congress. All these political parties have been campaigning using the failures of President Cyril Ramaphosa. So right now, as we speak, no one can come forward and dispute all these failures, especially if we use logic. In other words, if there's any other political party that can come forward and dispute these failures of ANC, that particular political party would be showing hypocrisy, because these failures are there. And when it comes to employment or reducing employment, it requires more than fixing. It requires more than dealing with unemployment. So in other words, promising 2 million jobs is impossible. ANC doesn't have a history of creating jobs because their policies don't know how to create job opportunities. So in other words, ANC cannot even create 100,000 jobs in a year. It's impossible. I can give them a test. They won't make it. They won't make it possible for them to create even 100,000 jobs. We are not fighting against the people who voted for ANC, but we are fighting against the ANC because ANC, based on history, it has not done anything to eliminate poverty, to create job opportunities. It's impossible. It's difficult for African National Congress.
But amongst ourselves as the youth of this country, we know who the true criminals are. We know who stole our land from our grandmothers. We know who stole our mines. We know who stole COVID-19 funds that was meant to keep our people alive. We know who stole Tembisa Hospital money. We know who stole SAA, ISCO, Sasol, Telkom. We know who is now stealing Eskom, Transnet, PRASA, and even privatizing our water. All the while, you are creating an impression that these are natural disasters, despite the fact that they are orchestrated by the true criminals of the government of today, deployed by the Oppenheimers. We know who stole the money that is meant to eradicate pit toilets in the Eastern Cape. We know who stole NSFAS money. We know the mafias of the Steinhoff heist. We know the thugs of the Skills Development Fund. And we definitely know who the #1 money launderer is.
I just want to talk about this thing of privatization. It should not be taken for granted. Because right now, as we speak, everything in South Africa is expensive. Electricity is expensive. Even water now is getting expensive. Just imagine if the government decides to privatize water, then it means water and electricity are going to be the resources or the services of rich people. Because right now, as we speak, if they go ahead with this thing of privatization, especially when it comes to water, then water is going to be more expensive than the grocery that you buy. And right now, as we speak, electricity is already expensive. Just imagine if they privatize Eskom, then it means electricity is going to be the service or the resources of those who are rich. So that is why people who are poor, whenever they cast a vote, whenever they decide to vote, they have to do so for themselves. Don't vote for somebody else. Don't vote to please somebody else to become a mayor or to become a councillor. You have to think about yourself. So this thing of privatization is very important and it should not be taken for granted. So right now, as we speak, everything is expensive, or something that we can say is reasonable is water. But if they privatize it, or the moment they privatize it, then it's going to be more expensive and affordable. So just imagine, we've been fighting for water to be free. We've been voting for political parties that are saying water should be free. But just imagine if they privatize it now. So if you are poor and you can't afford these things, that is why when it comes to voting, you have to cast a vote for someone or for a political party that cares about you, that cares about your needs.
There is absolutely nothing that the establishment, masquerading as a government of national unity, can do to deter us, the youth of today, from seeking out our generational mission. The government of the ANC has not fooled all of us. It is under the ANC that we saw privatization of state-owned entities at a large scale, much higher than that of the apartheid government. A trail of privatization that is so aggressive that even our healthcare isn't spared through the NHI. The rise of the establishment and the collapse of the state takes shape under the government of the ANC. That is the legacy of the ANC today. The positive outcomes of all of this neoliberal facade of the government of the day is that we now rightly characterize the neoliberal agenda encompassing of all its participants who are part of the GNU coalition. We now know who the enemy of economic freedom is. Even in the past, even if in the past they pretended to be a part of us and spoke like the forefathers of the emancipation movement, the battle lines have been drawn. It is the subject of the Oppenheimer, the GNU coalition versus the people of South Africa. The youth of this country will continue to chant economic freedom in our lifetime. We will continue to present bills in this house that call for expropriation of land without compensation. We will continue to call for nationalization of mines, banks, and other strategic sectors. We will push back against your corruption and hold the captains of the ruling class accountable. We will fight for the scrapping of student debt and continue to call for quality, free, and decolonized education in our lifetime. We will continue to call for free healthcare, housing, water, and sanitation. We will continue to remind you that the young people in this country deserve real jobs. It's 6 months.
That's true. Whenever ANC would create employment, it's only those internships that they would last like about 6 months to 12 months, maybe a year or 2 years. This is just a bribery to say we have created something. They don't have a history of creating something that would last, something permanent. This is a good thing to see young people talking like this, reminding other young people, because right now as we speak, we have many young people who are standing on street corners telling us that there's no need to vote. They don't participate in politics. They don't participate in the problems that are happening in their societies. But as long as we see young people like Naledi here, then it means there's a light at the end of the tunnel, because sometimes you have to preach the same sermon multiple times until people can get it. I hope this message will sit well with many young people across South Africa.
We want industrial development, insourcing of security guards and cleaners, free pads, Mr. President, and all those rent manipulators to be arrested and to rot in jail. The people's power is rising in Africa, and we will not be left behind.
Thank you, Honorable Member. I will now